Welcome to Easy Anatomy. This is part 2 of posterior triangle in which I'm going to talk about nerves located in the posterior triangle. So when you look at the nerves in the posterior triangle, you will notice something that all of them coming from cervical nerves. So if we say here is C1 down to C8, down to C8. C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, 8. Then thoracic nerve number 1. C1 to C4 all together they form cervical plexus. So this is cervical plexus. Cervical plexus, and we'll talk about major branches from cervical plexus. C1 down to C6, they form the roots of spinal accessory. Then C5 down to thoracic nerve number 1, they form together brachial plexus. From here to here, this is brachial plexus. And the brachial plexus is unique because you will see that C5 and 6 together, they form the upper trunk. C7 continue as middle trunk. C8 and T1 they form lower trunk. So this is basically all nerves located inside posterior triangle. So you have cervical plexus, you have spinal accessory, you have brachial plexus. So this is together brachial plexus. Now, I'm going to cover each one in detail. I will start with the easy one, which is the spinal accessory nerve. Spinal accessory nerve. The spinal accessory nerve, which is C1 to C6, ascend to the cranial cavity through foramen magnum. Through foramen magnum. Okay, so this is foramen magnum, and here is the spinal accessory nerve. Then is going to be joined by cranial accessory. Cranial accessory. So we have spinal from the spinal cord, and we have cranial from brainstem. So this is the one coming from medulla. From a nucleus there is called nucleus ambiguous. Nucleus ambiguous, which give also origin for glossopharyngeal and vagus nerve. So this is the cranial accessory, and this is a spinal accessory. Both of them joining each other, then they exit the cranial cavity, through jugular foramen. So this is jugular foramen. Which other nerve coming out through jugular foramen? Do you remember? We have this nerve, which is vagus nerve, coming from the same nucleus, nucleus ambiguous. So this is the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve. what happened? You will see that this cranial accessory, once they come out, once it come out through jugular foramen, is going to join vagus, become part of vagus nerve. However, this spinal accessory nerve is traveling through the neck posteriorly, where is going to penetrate the sternocleidomastoid muscle. This is sternocleidomastoid muscle, and here is trapezius. This nerve is going to travel through the muscle, penetrating the muscle at the junction between the upper third and the lower two-thirds. So this is the spinal accessory nerve. Here is the anterior triangle inside here, carotid triangle, and then go posterior, penetrating the muscle and cross the posterior triangle until it hide under trapezius. So this nerve supplying these two muscles. Spinal accessory nerve supplies the two muscles. Okay? So give branches here to the muscle, and these two muscles supplied by it. Okay, keep in mind that spinal accessory nerve considered a superficial undercover of the roof of the posterior triangle, and it can be damaged, like if there is any stab wound or any trauma which can affect this nerve. What could be the effect? If there is injury here inside the triangle, what could be the effect? Which muscle is going to be paralyzed? So the effect is going to impact only trapezius. Only trapezius. And in this condition, ask your patient to shrug the shoulder, is not going to be able to shrug the shoulder, or to elevate the arm above 90 degrees. So this is injury of spinal accessory inside posterior triangle lead to injury of paralysis of trapezius. Sternocleidomastoid is not going to be affected. Is not going to be affected. Why? Because it's going to be supplied by the spinal accessory before the trauma. And injury of trapezius means that patient unable to shrug or elevate shoulder. Okay, especially elevating shoulder above more than 90 degrees, because trapezius is responsible for elevating your arm, elevating the arm above 90 degrees, which is rotation of the scapula basically. So if you ask the patient to shrug the shoulder, is not going to be able to do that. If you ask your patient to raise the arm, raising arm more than 90 degrees, not able to do that. Not able to raise arm above 90 degrees. Okay, so a quick review. Spinal accessory has two roots. The accessory nerve has two roots. A spinal root coming from C1 to C6, ascend through foramen magnum to cranial cavity, is going to be joined by the cranial root coming from nucleus ambiguous, and both travel through jugular foramen with vagus nerve. The cranial accessory separating and joining vagus nerve, become part of vagus, and then the spinal accessory is traveling backward and penetrating sternocleidomastoid, then traveling through the undercover the roof of posterior triangle until it hide under trapezius, supplies both muscles. Okay. Thank you. Let us go to the next nerve. The next nerve is cervical plexus. Cervical plexus. As I mentioned, cervical plexus C1 down to C4. 2, 3, 4. Cervical plexus is going to give several cutaneous branches in addition to muscular branches. The cutaneous branches from this nerve including supraclavicular, nerve, which descend superficial to clavicle and divide into three branches. Here is the clavicle, the medial, the lateral, and this is medial, intermediate, and the lateral. Okay, supplying skin of thoracic wall, blue clavicle, and superficial to the clavicle. So this is the supraclavicular nerve. The second one, which ascend to the scalp region, is called the lesser occipital nerve. And we covered this before. Lesser occipital is going to supply skin over mastoid process and behind the auricle. The third one, which we call it great auricular nerve, and the great auricular nerve supplies skin over mandibular angle and part of the auricle. Okay, then we have one last one, which is called the transverse cervical nerve. The transverse cervical nerve is going to supply skin over anterior triangle. So we have how many cutaneous nerves coming from cervical plexus? We have 4. Lesser occipital nerve ascend behind the sternocleidomastoid, transverse cervical nerve, which cross over sternocleidomastoid to reach to the anterior triangle. The same for great auricular nerve. If we wanted to see the location of these nerves in relation to the sternocleidomastoid, here is the sternocleidomastoid. Is going to be crossed by the greater auricular and transverse cervical. Supraclavicular is going to be behind it, and lesser occipital also ascend behind it. So one descend behind it, one ascend behind it, one ascend superficial to it, one cross horizontally superficial to sternocleidomastoid. Okay, and we know now where each of them go. Is there any muscular branches? Yes. Muscular branches like what? You see, send some muscular branches to muscles of the floor of posterior triangle. In addition, C2 and D3 also supplying sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius. How? Sternocleidomastoid and trapezius supplied mainly by spinal accessory. This is the motor. However, sensation from sternocleidomastoid and trapezius, like deep sensation and pain sensation, carried by C2 and C3. Okay, so Anything else? Yes. C3, C4, and we can add C5. Together, they form phrenic nerve. Phrenic nerve. Again, we have phrenic nerve coming from C3, C4, C5, supplying diaphragm. Okay, what else? Ansa cervicalis. Ansa cervicalis. So we need to keep in mind this is a unique nerve, Ansa cervicalis, which has two roots. This root, which we call it C1, see? Another root coming from C2 and C3. They form Ansa cervicalis. We will cover this now. So the C1 is going to be part of hypoglossal nerve and is going to leave hypoglossal nerve as descendants hypoglossi. Then C2 and D3 together they form a descendant cervicalis, and when they join each other they form Ansa cervicalis. So this is a summary, and I will go into some detail about Ansa cervicalis. Just to remind you, cervical plexus, you have C1 to C4, C1, C2, 3, 4 together they form the anterior primary rami of them, they form cervical plexus. The major cutaneous branches are 4: lesser occipital, great auricular, transverse cervical, supraclavicular. Then we have muscular branches to the muscles in the floor of posterior triangle. We have sensory branches to supply sternocleidomastoid and trapezius coming from C2 and D3. We have important nerve taking origin from C3, C4 in addition to C5. It's called the phrenic nerve. Then we have important nerve is called the Ansa cervicalis to supply infrahyoid muscles. Infrahyoid muscles. So how Ansa cervicalis is made? How Ansa cervicalis is made? Ansa cervicalis is very simple to remember. You have hypoglossal nerve, which is traveling through the anterior triangle. Hypoglossal nerve. This is cranial nerve number 12. Then what is next? This is coming from this number 12. So next is the spinal cord. So this nerve coming from medulla. Then you have spinal cord. Okay, this is medulla. This is spinal cord, correct? Then you will see that let us make it a little thicker because it's going to carry some fibers inside it. The hypoglossal nerve. So you will see C1 is going to join hypoglossal nerve. This is C1. And through hypoglossal nerve is going to give retrograde branch which ascend until it reaches to the posterior cranial fossa and supply meninges of posterior cranial fossa. This is meningeal branch. Then it's traveling through hypoglossal nerve. Once it come to the carotid triangle, is descending and form descendants hypoglossi. Okay, in front of the carotid sheath. In front of carotid sheath. Then it contain, some branches contain and send branch to thyroid muscle. And the last branch coming out is going to geniohyoid muscle. So how many branches coming out from C1, which is going to be carried by hypoglossal nerve? You have meningeal branch ascend to the posterior cranial fossa, supplying meningeal covering there. Then you have descendants hypoglossi, you have nerve to thyrohyoid, you have nerve to geniohyoid. C2 and C3, they form together what we call it descendants cervicalis. Then they join each other with descendants hypoglossi, they form Ansa cervicalis. And from there, Ansa cervicalis send branch to sternohyoid, another branch to sternothyroid, another branch to omohyoid. So now you have this muscle all together, we call them what? Infrahyoid muscles. Infrahyoid muscles. Infrahyoid muscles. So this is the Ansa cervicalis. Okay? Easy? I think it's very easy. So you have hypoglossal nerve coming from medulla, joined by C1, which distributes through hypoglossal to geniohyoid, thyrohyoid, and infrahyoid muscles through Ansa cervicalis, and send sensory branches to meninges. Then you have C2 and C3 joined together, they form descendants cervicalis, which is going to join descendants hypoglossi and through there send to these three muscles. The last nerve in the posterior triangle is going to be brachial plexus, and I am not going to talk too much about it because you will cover that in the upper extremity. Brachial plexus. Brachial plexus is made of several roots coming from cervical nerve C5, C6, C7, C8, and thoracic 1. C1 and 5, they form upper trunk. C7 form middle trunk. 8 and T1 form lower trunk. Okay, so you have roots, you have trunk, then each trunk is going to divide into anterior division and the posterior division. Anterior, posterior, anterior, posterior. So you have divisions. Then these divisions join each other to form what we call it cords. So for example, you will see all posterior division joining each other. Here is a posterior division, joining posterior division of lower middle trunk, joining the posterior division of lower trunk. They form what we call it posterior cord. Posterior cord. This is the anterior division of the upper trunk with the anterior division of middle trunk. They form lateral cord. Okay, then the anterior division of lower trunk form medial cord. So how many cords do we have? We have 3 cords. You have lateral cord by the anterior division of the upper and the middle trunk. Then you have medial cord by the anterior division of the lower trunk. Then you have posterior cord, which is made by the posterior division of each trunk. Okay, of all trunks. This is a posterior cord. What are branches coming from brachial plexus? Brachial plexus, this is the nerve of upper extremity. Okay, so C5, 6, 7 together they form, like from the roots there is some branches coming. These branches, like this one, which is called the nerve 2 serratus anterior. Okay, C5 contribute to phrenic nerve. Okay, there is nerve to rhomboids coming from C5, or dorsal scapular nerve coming from C5 and 6, mainly 5. Okay, nerve to rhomboids. So those are the main nerves coming from roots. Nerve to serratus anterior, nerve to rhomboid, sometimes we call it dorsal scapular nerve, and phrenic nerve also. Then from trunks, only upper trunk is the one which give branches. Give 2 branches. This one is called suprascapular, supplies 2 muscles, supraspinatus and the infraspinatus muscles. Supraspinatus and the infraspinatus. Then there is another nerve to subclavius muscle. Nerve to subclavius. So upper trunk is the only trunk which give branches. Middle and lower don't give branches. Okay. Then cords give branches. Lateral cord give 3 branches. Medial cord and the posterior cord, each of one, give 5 branches. Okay. What are branches from cords? Branches coming from cords. Branches of brachial plexus. You will see branches coming from roots, branches coming from trunk, the upper one, then branches coming from cords. Okay, the one coming from roots, you have nerve to serratus anterior, sometimes we call it long thoracic nerve, nerve to rhomboids, phrenic nerve, etc. From the upper trunk you have 2 nerves, suprascapular, supply 2 muscles, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, nerve to subclavius, supplying subclavius muscle. From cords, this is more detail here, we need to expand on it before we finish. So branches of cords. Lateral cord give 3 branches, medial and posterior, each one give 5. Okay, what are those branches? Let us say those are the cords. This is lateral cord, medial cord, posterior cord. Okay, the lateral cord give musculocutaneous, supplying muscles of the front of the arm, is going to give lateral pectoral nerve, supply pectoralis major muscle, and give lateral root of median nerve. Medial cord is going to give medial root of median nerve. So this nerve is called median nerve. This nerve mostly to the front of forearm, and some muscles in the hand, muscle of hand. This is the median nerve. So lateral cord give musculocutaneous, lateral pectoral nerve to pectoralis muscle, pectoralis major mainly, musculocutaneous to the muscles of the front of the arm, and here is lateral root of the median nerve. Medial root of the median nerve coming from the medial cord. Median nerve responsible mainly for most of the muscles in the front of the forearm, in addition to muscles of the hand, in particular of the thumb, thinner muscle of the thumb. Okay, what are other branches from the medial cord? This one give lateral pectoral, medial cord give medial pectoral, which supply pectoralis major and minor. Okay, supply pectoralis muscle is giving the medial root is going to give medial cutaneous nerve, medial cutaneous of the arm, medial cutaneous of forearm. From the name you know, supplying skin of the arm, supplying skin of forearm, the front. Then the medial side, sorry. Then it is going to give the big branch here is called ulnar nerve. And the ulnar nerve supply mostly muscles of hand. You have plenty of muscles in the hand, mainly supplied by ulnar nerve. Posterior cord send 5 branches also. The 2 big branches from the posterior cord called radial and axillary. Radial and axillary. Radial nerve supply muscles of the back of arm and the forearm. Also skin. Okay, so radial nerve is a huge nerve supplying all muscles in the back of arm and the forearm, and the skin also over the back of the arm and the forearm. Axillary nerve is going to supply big muscle called the deltoid muscle. It's very big muscle, a huge muscles on the shoulder is called the deltoid muscle. Okay, what other branches? Nerve to latissimus, dorsal muscle, upper subscapular, from the name to subscapularis muscle, lower subscapular, from the name to subscapularis muscle. So you have 5 branches: upper, lower subscapular, nerve to latissimus dorsi, axillary nerve, radial nerve. So again, quick review for brachial plexus. Brachial plexus has brachial plexus is going to be formed by roots of spinal nerves from C5 down to T1. You have upper trunk by C5 and C6, middle trunk C7, lower trunk C8 and T1. Then trunks is going to split into anterior and posterior division. The posterior division joining each other to form what we call it posterior cord. Anterior division of the upper and the middle trunk, they join each other, they form lateral cord. Anterior division from the lower trunk is continuing as medial cord. Okay? Then we have branches coming from roots, branches coming from upper trunk, branches coming from cords. From roots, remember phrenic nerve is coming from C5 in addition to 3 and 4. Remember long thoracic nerve, we call it serratus anterior nerve, to a muscle called serratus anterior. Then nerve to rhomboid, sometimes we call it dorsal scapular nerve. Okay. Then from the upper trunk you have 2 branches, suprascapular and nerve to subclavius. Cords are the major source of nerve supply of upper extremity. As you see here, we have 3 branches coming from lateral cord. The first one called the musculocutaneous, supplying muscles in the front of the arm. Second one, lateral pectoral nerve, is going to pectoralis major muscle. Then lateral root of median nerve. Medial cord send the medial root of median nerve. Median nerve supply mostly muscles in the front of the forearm in addition to the muscles of your thumb. We call them thinner muscles. You have, in addition to that, this big branch is called the ulnar nerve. The ulnar nerve is responsible mainly for supplying muscles in the hand. And then you have medial pectoral nerve supplying pectoralis major and minor. You have medial cutaneous of the arm, medial cutaneous of the forearm. From the name means supplying skin over the medial side of the arm and the forearm. Posterior cord supplying again 2 major branches, radial and axillary. The axillary mainly supplying deltoid muscle, radial nerve supplying all muscles in the back of the arm and the forearm. Finally, we have 3 additional branches, one to latissimus dorsi muscle and 2 branches to subscapularis muscles. Okay, so this is summary for brachial plexus. Thank you.